Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Alien Earth Episode 5, the famous tagline of the 1979 film, which is one of the all-time greatest taglines. In a space set episode that ends up being better than many Alien movies, we finally learn what happened on the USCSS Maginot, and it turns out a severely incompetent crew who gives no shits about safety protocols or putting on grown-up faces when people start dying. Also, I just said a space set episode when technically everything that exists anywhere is space set. Outer space. I should have said outer space. You got what I mean. Anyway, let's break down this episode scene by scene for all the details you missed. And I am wearing our Weyland-Yutani shirt that you can get exclusively at our merch store, nerdriot.shop, which actually has a lot of cool alien-inspired designs on shirts, mugs, and hoodies. And it all goes directly to supporting us at New Rockstars. All right, the opening title of this episode flashes back to images of the Maginot from episode 1 as we are returning to fill in the gaps of what happened to the Maginot crew that episode left out. We see the same shots of the full crew around the mess hall table, including a shot of Zverny and Bronsky seated beside each other, and now we know they were indeed hooking up. In episode 1, we saw her swatting away his hand playfully. Since this episode centers around the doomed crew, let's break everyone down. There's RJ Dinsdale, Captain. He had a small number of lines in episode 1, and we really start this episode with him already dead when Raheem reveals he tried to cut the facehugger off of his face, and then the acidic blood burned through Dinsdale's neck. There's Zoya Zaveri, executive officer. She's second in command after Dinsdale. There's Kumi Morrow, chief security officer, technically third in command, a trusted plant by Yutani, who said that he was a begging kid on the street that she brought in. There's Petrovich, the chief engineer. Turns out he is a saboteur. Back in episode 1, remember, he was the one member of the crew who seemed to know anything about Prodigy.
It's synths, AI. It was started by a kid maybe 10 years ago?
He knew this because he was chatting with Boy Cavalier on the side during all this time. Also in episode 1, when they were going to sleep, we did see Petrovich lingering, sitting up for a bit longer, and then as the hood began to lower, you could see him taking deep breaths like a diver takes before they have to hold their breath for a long time, suggesting that he might have been holding his breath as the sleep gas was pumping in. There's Bronsky, the science officer, the one Zaveri has a relationship with. There's Chibuzo, the other science officer, the one who carelessly eats and drinks in her workspace. There's Raheem, the medical officer, the one person on the ship who seems bound by a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. There's Tang, the navigator, someone who Raheem has often been calling a robot. So I did assume that he was a synth, but it turns out he's just a major creeper. There's Clem Mady, the junior security officer who reports to Morrow. There's Shmuel, the engineer, Malachite, the engineering apprentice, and there are various others whose names have popped up like Austin, Johns, Sullivan, Ortiz. We don't get to know any of them too well. And then Rascal is the ship's kitty cat. Since there was Jonesy on the Nostromo, we have to wonder if all Weyland-Yutani ships might have cats, like bodegas. Clem wakes Morrow up 17 days before their arrival to Earth to tell him there was a fire and some of the specimens got loose. All the doorways on the interior of the Maginot have semiotic standard above them. Here, we can see the symbols for ladderway and bulkhead door. These little symbols on every surface were really invented by production designer Ron Cobb, who worked on the 1979 Alien film, and they were used for the Nostromo interior and have since been used in a number of sci-fi production designs. Every doorway characters pass under in this episode have examples of these. While Raheem, Chibuzo, and Zaveri are all trying to get Morrow to focus on the medical status of Dinsdale and Bronsky, he repeatedly just asks about the fire, less worried about the health of the crew and more worried about the security of the ship and its cargo. Chibuzo says protocols to put anyone who has touched an alien life form into cryosleep, and Raheem counts down the days left to Earth and adds, for those of you not counting in seconds, which is a callback to Tang telling them how much longer to Earth in seconds, and Raheem shit on him for that. Morrow calls Clem chlamydia, and later on Clem's comms recording, we see that his name is Clem Mady. When Clem suggests Bronsky is gonna have that thing humping his face, you can see Zaveri stirring a bit, suddenly self-aware that some of the security guys in this room might have been seeing her humping Bronsky via the security footage that Clem definitely mentioned the scene before. And I like how, in the dynamics of the scene, this is when she stops out loud worrying about how compromised Bronsky is, and instead just suddenly agrees with Morrow in front of the others that the cargo is a priority. It's just a little performative shift here because she doesn't want her leadership threatened. Shmuel says Morrow that since the fire fried their nav systems,
meaning we were a spaceship, and now we're a missile, and we're heading towards Earth.
You should fix that.
I like the idea of describing the ship as a missile or an arrow headed to Earth, like the entire Earth could be threatened by this poisoned bullet that is now headed straight for the planet. Morrow confronts Zaveri on the bridge to tell her he knows about her and Bronsky, and he uses it to threaten to replace her, but Zaveri smartly says that that would be a mutiny, and you'll notice that puts Morrow on his heels, because he knows that there are enough blue-collar types on this crew who would default to pirate mode when the word mutiny is thrown out and rally against Morrow as a traitor, especially since later in this episode we learn that Petrovich had a wife or a partner who was part of this crew in the past. This wouldn't have been the only couple who coupled off at some point on this voyage. Yes, there are a bunch of incompetent dummies on this ship, but they're romantic incompetent dummies. And they believe in pirate code. Morrow says that Zaveri can talk to Mother all she wants, but his orders are from Yutani herself, and he cares only about the cargo.
Not you, not me, not the cap.
Oh, poor Rascal. We actually later see Rascal hanging out in Morrow's bunk when Morrow looks at Estelle's photos, just trying to get some love to the guy who needs love most of all. We see Morrow working the crime scene like a detective. He watches back the security footage of the moment Dinsdale and Bronsky rushed out to put out the fire. The facehuggers crawl out of the egg, looking particularly creepy crawly now that we can see them fully move via CGI. But when they're held in close up and shaken, they switch to a practical prop with robotic appendages. So suddenly, it all feels very visceral. Dinsdale tries to fight it, but its spiny fingers grab his head like a giant hand. Zaveri cries over Bronsky's cryobed and pours some dirt from Utah that she carries with her. The soil is red, making me wonder if it's from Red Rocks, Zion National Park, one of the most stunningly gorgeous national parks in the world. Bronsky had an English accent, Zaveri is American, so I assume it's like where she's from. This intercuts with Morrow watching the footage of their sex, and then we get this random jump scare.
Almost home, babe.
Yeah, Zaveri doesn't really react to this moment, so I'm wondering who this jump scare is for. Is it for Morrow thinking about this? Is it for us? The red soil left on the hood of Bronsky's cryobed is framed right over his stomach, which ironically is where the chestburster will punch a bloody hole out of in a few hours. The facehugger tightens its tail around Bronsky's neck, just as the facehugger did around Kane's neck when it was threatened in the 1979 film. Morrow tells him that there's someone getting around the ship without the halls, but rather through the vents and various access points. So in this way, structurally in the episode, their hunt for the Saboteur among them mirrors the Nostromo crew's hunt for the Xenomorph in the 79 film, which also stalked that ship through similar unseen paths in the bulkheads. Zaveri talks to Mother. I love the usage of split focus throughout the show. Zaveri's face in the foreground is in focus, and Mother's text responses are also in focus on the screen in the background. This mirrors the later shot in the episode where Zaveri's in the foreground covering her mouth, trying to muffle her breathing from the threat, the Xenomorph also in focus in the background. On the keyboard, once again, we see the production design from the 1979 film. It's not a QWERTY keyboard, but one with various symbols. It's exactly the same board that they had in the 1979 film, but it looks like here it's been flipped 180 degrees compared to the way it was oriented in that film. We see that Zaveri refers to the eggs as ovomorphs. Ovomorph is the rarely used in-universe term for the stage of the xenomorph life cycle in which a facehugger is still unhatched from an egg. Ovo means egg. The only response Mother gives is a cold-hearted insistence to deprioritize the safety of the crew and focus only on the survival of the cargo. Basically, crew is expendable from the 1979 film was not a singular occurrence to the Nostromo. And the way Mother doesn't even give Zaveri a chance to just take in the order and just repeats the text of acknowledge, acknowledge. It's just so cruel. Morrow looks through his old mementos of his daughter Estelle while listening to We'll Meet Again, the 1941 version by the Ink Spots covering the original 1939 Vera Lynn version. The Ink Spots cover was used in the Fallout series on Prime Video as a reference to the Vera Lynn version being the iconic music that played over the final nuclear blast montage in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. I do love that Morrow listens to the Ink Spots version though, and also this being the year 2120, a future where people still watch Ice Age 4 Continental Drift. Maybe he is listening to it as a reference to either the Amazon Prime Fallout series from 100 years prior or from Dr. Strangelove 150 years prior. I mean, Ripley again sings You Are My Lucky Star from Singing in the Rain in a movie that is set 2 years after this. Morrow looks over the photos and letters from Estelle, holding her pacifier on his finger like a ring. He reads one letter on Weyland-Yutani stationery, printed through a dot matrix printer, which I find to be so analog 1970s. It's so perfect. I love it. But it's so heartbreaking to read all these letters. She calls him Dada Bear.
Dada Bear, I had a nightmare last night. Mom tried to tell me it was just a dream, but it took a real long time to go back to sleep. I dreamed that your spaceship flied by the moon.
And then we get a picture of a dinosaur or a dog, maybe both. Indeed, the Maginot will fly past the moon and scrape the station that's there. Then there's another letter from when Estelle would be in high school. Yes, all of this forms a heartbreaking time dilation between father and daughter, much like Cooper with his daughter Murph in Interstellar. This next one reads, Dada Bear, I'm starting to look at schools. I didn't know this, but Mom said that Weyland-Yutani will pay for all my school. That's if I go to a Weyland-Yutani sanctioned school. Is that really the case? Because I want to go to one of the old world colleges. They don't have those restrictions on the content that the corporate schools have, I think. If I tried, I could get into Harvard. But of course, we'd have to pay for it ourselves. Also, my friend Cody's dad works for Weyland-Yutani too, but she only gets a partial scholarship. How important are are you? I wish we could talk. That's not the first or last time I've thought that. I'm sorry, but sometimes it would be good to have another voice to bounce this stuff off with. Estelle. Interesting stuff here. I assume if Morrow was a personal pick by the women of the Yutani family, surely he'd have enough money or connections or resources to be able to send Estelle to Harvard, but it sounds like the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, including the women in charge of it, would want all company families' kids to go to their sanctioned schools. I'm just impressed that schools like Harvard are still kicking around in this post-government world in 2120, but it would also mean that Harvard University, as a school founded in 1636, both preceded and succeeded the American democracy experiment. A flashback to Morrow sitting with Estelle on the beach is abruptly interrupted by this cruel message on year only 8 of 65. Mr. Morrow, this is to inform you that your daughter Estelle, 19, died in a fire that destroyed her home on the 12th of April. Her effects have been placed in storage for you on your return in 53 years. Oh my God. So 1 year into whatever college Estelle went to, she died in a house fire. And it happened so early in Morrow's mission that he couldn't even attend a funeral. There's no sentiment in the message. My theory is that Estelle did end up going to Harvard, but the wars against the old world, led by the Triumvirate, might have firebombed the city of Boston or the Cambridge area, specifically maybe even targeting the academic areas to kill off any academic thought leaders and make the society easier to subjugate and to force into being corporate drones. Or maybe Yutani deliberately killed Estelle this way to make Morrow undividedly loyal to her and to his mission. Or maybe they lied and she's still alive. I hope it's the last one, just for Morrow's sake. And one final heartbreaking detail on this, you can see Morrow's past teardrop stains on the bottom of this page. We see the explosion from the ship exterior with no sound because we are in space where no one can hear you scream. And Morrow wakes up from dreaming about this, clutching the gun on stun mode. Shmuel reports that the saboteurs struck again, reducing their fuel reserves.
In 24 hours, this ship turns from missile to arrow.
They discover that the chest burster exploded from Bronsky's chest. Zaveri asks how big these things get, and the fact that she doesn't know tells us that there definitely seems to be some siloed information when it comes to these creatures and the crew. Like Morrow knows about the reproductive cycle, and they somehow captured these creatures, losing a lot of men in the process, according to Shmuel in episode 1, but not everyone on the current crew knows everything about them. Chibuzzo calmly studies the other creatures, and look, I don't know why a science officer would be so okay eating food on the same table where alien creatures have been dissected recently with an open bottle of water sloshing it everywhere. But I think this is really just an issue of all of these crew people being the type of people willing to take really shitty jobs on time-dilated missions that force them to permanently sever ties with their families with terrible working conditions so that any infraction could result in them losing 16ths of shares from their total pay. So yeah, doesn't it make sense that even the smartest people on the ship are not the best and brightest? And if you think everyone in this episode is acting too insensitive to the crew people dying around them, bear in mind that they have already lost a lot of crew people acquiring these creatures to begin with. So they're all kind of losing it, and they're all kind of emotionally spent. Now, in fairness to Chibuzzo, we do later hear her saying that she chooses to eat in the lab because she cannot stand Tang cigarettes, but there must have been some safer place on this ship for her to eat her food in. I love how so many of the shots in the scene with Chibuzzo are shot from the kaleidoscopal perspective of the TSLS, and we really get a sense of how this creature is analyzing the situation, figuring out how these containers open and close. We also get a name for the ticks, species 19. Even they proved to be smart enough to be able to open the slider on the lid, which the TSLS observes, and then smacks its tank to help distract Chibuzzo so that she won't see where the tick goes. So that tells us that the TSLS is capable of cooperative behavior if it means destabilizing the overall system so that it would have an advantage. But as we'll see later, it's also an apex predator in its own right who isn't at all afraid of the xenomorph. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. If you ever find yourself looking around and thinking, I thought I'd be further along by now, and when reality doesn't match that picture, it's easy to feel like you've fallen behind. The truth is, it's completely normal to feel frustrated with where you are. Everyone wants something more, and while it's okay to sit with those feelings, sometimes they start to weigh you down or get in the way of moving forward. I know I've certainly felt that way. When I moved to Los Angeles, I thought by 5 years I will have gotten a job on a movie or on a TV show where I'm in complete creative control of that. And I thought that was unrealistic until until I looked around and I saw some friends who did kind of have that kind of career agency. And I thought, damn, what did I do wrong? Or why am I not good enough? And then I realized maybe I have enough. And one thing therapy really helped me with is the fact that everyone, no matter how successful they are, is feeling that same kind of anxiety. That anxiety comes from a place that is not based on your external circumstances so much, but from someplace else. And that's why I'm just really grateful for therapy, and why BetterHelp is a sponsor of today's video. They make it easy to talk to someone who can help you work through those feelings and find a way forward. A good therapist helps you see that you're not behind in life, you're simply just on your own unique timeline. They help you recognize that your identity isn't fixed by some arbitrary deadline, but by constantly evolving as you grow. This perspective shift alone can be so beneficial. BetterHelp makes starting therapy easy. Just head to betterhelp.com/newrockstars, fill out a questionnaire, and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple days. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Click the link in the description, scan the QR code, or go to betterhelp.com/newrockstars and get 10% off your first month of therapy. The Species 19 tick spews its minnows into the water bottle, and this is one of the most disgusting things I've seen in an Alien title, and that obviously is saying a lot. From this point forward, we, the viewers, cannot take our eyes off of that open water bottle. It is Chekhov's water bottle. When Chibouzo grabs it, the camera refocuses on the TSLS behind it in a clear eye line, as this thing now deduces that these lesser life forms, these humans, will not be in control of the situation for much longer. Now, the TSLS using two of its tentacles to slingshot itself around the room, making it semi-airborne, is yet another element that I love about this creature design. We see exactly why these things are apex predators and whatever their home environments are. Like, I would love to see a spin-off series just around the TSLS. Maybe even Dan Trachtenberg in Predator Badlands might have a way to work the TSLS in. That would be pretty cool. On their way back to the mess, there is a little moment where Rahim and Chibouzo are in the middle of a debate if you listen closely.
You haven't tasted the honey, you don't know what bitter is.
I love whatever they were talking about there. It seems like they were talking about the similar subjectivity of taste that we were talking about last week with the flavor strips. As Zaveri tries to explain their situation, I love how in this scene there's constant over-talking, which was really a Robert Altman-inspired staple in the original 1979 film, but it also shows how this crew doesn't yet respect Zaveri's authority as acting captain. And again, they're not the best and brightest, and they have just 17 days left on this mission, so they're not taking it seriously. Throughout it all, Mr. Tang really creeps us out with the precise way that he pinches his cigarette and how he lets the others complete the sentence here.
The tanks blew. We're flying on fumes. Yeah, we're flying on fumes.
I think this episode is setting up Mr. Tang as a red herring saboteur who's just too calm for the situation. Zaveri says that they have a saboteur on board, and poor Malachite doesn't know what the word saboteur means.
It's a saboteur. Is that like a Frenchman? Shut up.
I'm declaring a shipwide emergency.
Bad Frenchman.
Frenchman, a bad Frenchman. So funny. Malachite dumps hot sauce all over his lo mein while we push closer and closer on Chibouzo's Chekhov's water bottle, waiting for her to take a sip, even as we see the spermy little minnows swimming inside. Ugh. But Malachite, because he was distracted while Zaverny snapped at him and deducted his pay, he dumped too much hot sauce on his lo mein. And yes, I love that it's lo mein, because it was lo mein in the 1979 Alien film that Kane was choking on when the chestburster started to stir. But we know Malachite loves hot sauce, because back in episode 1, if you look closely, you can see Malachite taking a bottle of hot sauce to go with him. He coughs similarly to the way Kane coughed while interrupting the meal in the 1979 film, but it's all a bait and switch to the viewers who know that film pretty encyclopedically as I do, to set up the water being drank by Malachite instead. And Noah Hawley shoots it with a triple shot to really underline this critical ingestion. Throughout this part of the episode, we hear the voice of Mother playing over the PA system.
Estimated progress status, 12%.
Noah Hawley was asked by Collider who voiced Mother in this episode, pointing out that it does sound a lot like Sigourney Weaver, but Hawley revealed that it was the series editor, Robin August, who recorded the temp audio, and they ended up not replacing that audio because it sounded pretty good. Morrow interrogates Rahim using the dripping, steaming vents of the damaged fuel cells above to make his subject sweat and undergo a kind of water torture, but later we will see with Mr. Tang that dripping from overhead actually is coming from a xenomorph. As Shmuel sticks his hand in the machinery, we feel a bit of paranoia as the camera takes the point of view of some creepy crawly about to bite his arm, but another fake out uses Malachite's shadow and the lowering chain to make us think a xenomorph tail is coming down or a tick silking down, but it's just a chain. Yes, these ships have a ton of dripping and a ton of chains hanging down for no reason, but we do see Malachite hook it into something, so it is important to what they're doing in some way, but we are reminded of the dripping hanging chains that hid the xenomorph in plain sight right before it killed Brett in the 1979 film. Shmuel explains to Malachite the time dilation of their mission, a concept this kid clearly has not grasped. It's so sad how dumb he is, but he never gets a chance to even think about it as those tick minnows in his belly cause him to begin to vomit blood. It's so sad when Shmuel realizes it wasn't just puke. He takes on this panicked fatherly tone when his apprentice starts to really get hurt like this. Chibouzo says that she noticed the xenomorphs give off gamma radiation, so she was thinking about rigging up a Geiger counter, but then she trails off when she realizes the Teocellus had broken out. The gamma radiation detail is pretty interesting because it's also how they tracked the xenomorph in the vents in the 1979 film and the warriors in the 1986 film, but it suggested that xenomorphs sustain themselves on gamma radiation, and that's how they grow so quickly without having to ingest any food. They are the perfect organism, and part of being perfect is not having any waste or a digestive tract that they would need. Chibouzo says she's loose and refers to the Teocellus as the Eye, and the fact that she calls it the Eye gives it a kind of respect that now makes me fear this thing even more. It's like the Eye of Sauron, or like a god's eye, you know? We see the thing sling down as they back out of the door, and as Zaveri hits the button to close off that lab, I know that we were all watching that gap in the door closing, waiting for that thing to fly out in her face. Morrow interrogates Mr. Tang, saying how the navlogs he referenced, proving he was on the bridge at the time of the fire, could have been faked.
And some people say, oh, this is just a simulation. But that's not the conversation we're having.
Of course, a weirdo like Mr. Tang would be a big subscriber for simulation theory, but he uses Morrow's questioning about his late night watching to Socratically get him to ask whether cryopods can be read as full when they're actually empty, and that leads him to Petrovich. Now, with the comm recovery complete, Morrow reviews the messages from Clem to his parents, from Bronsky to some loved ones of his, telling them about him falling in love with Zaveri, which is so tragic, and then to Malachite bragging about his position to his family without knowing what an apprentice is. Yeah, those mandated Weyland-Yutani schools are really helping society, and then a message about Shmuel complaining about red tape, and then finally Petrovich.
65 years, and all the risk that we took, and bugs laid eggs in my woman's eyes. And for what, you know?
Yeah, here's where we learn that Petrovich's wife or his lover was one of the crew people they lost when first trying to acquire these specimens. And it sounds like she died from the Teocellus. But we learn Boy Cavalier actually conspired with Petrovich for all of this.
You can pull this off? Landing the ship in my kingdom? You're about to be the richest man in whatever cousin-marrying shithole valley you cows in.
This confirms that the Prodigy CEO deliberately arranged with Petrovich to aim this arrow at a part of the world that Prodigy would have controlled, and then had Petrovich disable the nav systems, all so that Prodigy could steal these specimens from Weyland-Yutani. Boy Cavalier knew this crash would be coming before it happened, and it makes us wonder how many other Weyland-Yutani ships might Boy Cavalier have been in touch with. Petrovich requests to be put in a new synth body after all of this is said or done, if he were to survive the crash. It's kind of similar to the deal with the devil that Cypher makes with the agents of the Matrix. Like, yes, I will betray all these people on this crew, but I want to be rebooted in a new body. I like how later Clem even asks Morrow, which one is Petrovich again? Because they've all had so little time awake together among such a large crew. Raheem and Chibouzo try to extract the ticks from Malachite's esophagus tract. Similar to the acidic blood, these ticks have a defense mechanism for this kind of thing, spraying this poisonous mist that suffocates Chibouzo and Raheem. This is how the scene got like this when Hermit finds it in episode 2. Morrow takes command of the ship and forms a plan to use their remaining fuel to enter geosynchronous orbit with Earth to try to bring up a cleaning crew while he and Clem seek Petrovich, but Petrovich gets into a shootout with the two of them. Clem gets hit, the Teocellus slings around the room, and Clem takes a headshot. Morrow gets a drop on Petrovich and uses his cyborg blade hand to stab him through the gut from behind, kind of like the alien queen stabbing Bishop in Aliens. Petrovich says,
It doesn't matter. You can't stop it. They want their monsters. Here they come.
And as Petrovich lays dead, the Teocellus slithers over the camera lens, making us feel like it's crawling on our face. Ugh. Zaveri pours out the rest of her red Utah sand to mourn Chibouzo and Malachite and Raheem, and then the xenomorph lowers down behind her and for some reason doesn't immediately stab her, but rather just uses its tail to trip her. I wonder if it's because it saw and respected whatever rituals Zaveri was doing, but either way, as it chases her, I love the movement of the xenomorph running through the halls using all the surfaces. Zaveri finds Shmuel standing facing away from her with the same kind of eerie calmness that we saw the sheep have last episode. The Teocellus has burrowed into his brain, and I love how this actor emotes all of this, specifically when the Teocellus uses a tentacle sticking out of Shmuel's nose to lift up his lip to try to force a smile. I mean, this squid thing might be the best comedic performance of 2025. Morrow gets into the room, and through Shmuel, we see how the Teocellus is again analyzing the situation, knowing to back up when Morrow raises the gun directly at the eye. It uses Shmuel's vocal cords to make this chirping sound. It turns out this is a chest-thumping warrior cry to attract the xenomorph into the room, but when these two apex predators recognize each other, they pounce the way Kong and Godzilla would. I love the sound design of this fight. You can hear the pained little squeals from the xenomorph that we heard in the 1986 Aliens when the mounted machine guns tore through the xenomorph warriors, and when the Teocellus Shmuel gets stabbed by the tail, he lets out an inhuman bellow like the roar of John Carpenter's The Thing when Benning's thing gets cornered outside. We see the xenomorph from the Teocellus' point of view, and the xenomorph, confused, jabs Shmuel's jugular, not the eye. So then the Teocellus latches onto the xenomorph's face, looking for an eye hole. It's an interesting thought, a xenomorph controlled by a Teocellus. Good God, the possibilities there. But it wouldn't really work, right? Because xenomorphs do not have eyes or ocular cavities the way we do. Their heads would also be impossible to burrow into without releasing acidic blood. The Teocellus would be burned up that way. So instead, we see the Teocellus flung against the wall, and we know in episode 2 that it will eventually find poor Rascal the cat. We cycle back to the moment from episode 1 with Zaveri trying to get into the mother room as the xenomorph finally catches up to her. And now we can hear what Morrow was humming in that moment, something I was really trying to figure out back in episode 1. It's of course, "We'll Meet Again." He's mentally preparing to meet his daughter Estelle once more. But I think the saddest part of this is that Morrow had to leave all of his mementos from Estelle back in his cabin. His last memories of Estelle are gone, and we see that reflected as the father and daughter fade away from the beach memory. This episode ends by jumping ahead to the present day. We find ourselves in a new cityscape of a city owned by Weyland-Yutani. The Weyland-Yutani logo is on a tower, and instead of Prodigy banners showing Boy Cavalier in New Siam, here we see banners showing Yutani's visage adorning the other towers. A layer of fog covers the lower levels of the city, so it's really a city above the clouds. We know from episode 1 that Weyland-Yutani owns North and South America, so maybe this is a futuristic San Francisco, which often has Carl the Fog hanging around it. If you're from the Bay Area, you know who Carl is. Yutani greets Morrow under a cherry blossom in an indoor rock garden, guarded by these insane looking armed guards in traditional red outfits. I don't know what to make of this, but it's very Blade Runner 2049, and I love them. We learn that Yutani's grandmother took in Morrow when he was a feral child with a palsied arm, begging in the street. Yutani reports that Cavalier agreed to legal arbitration, but Morrow insists he needs to be deployed to kill Cavalier himself. And that's where we leave this amazing 5th episode of Alien Earth. Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Far North and Northwest QLD Emergency Services, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.